Welcome back to Combat Convos. Today, we're going to be talking about the most numerous unit type that you'll see on your tabletop on the battlefield. That is, of course, the infantry, where I hail from and Mr. Moon hails from in our army days, is Caleb. Let's talk about just the basis of some infantry units right here. Armed citizenry. Is towns under siege, people gather pitchforks. How can that come out in our game board?
Yeah, I think that there are many different infantry types that you can include in the age of the flintlock, the age of the musket, with the most bottom tier being that armed citizenry. The armed citizenry isn't really something that you should think about including in your army's roster. This is more just like you're fighting in a town controlled by you, and a few old veterans pick up their muskets and join the fight. These are by far from any kind of professionalized troops. Whenever employing these, uh, the commander using them needs to keep in mind, like almost like Berlin 1945. Like these are not even second rate troops. These are scraping the barrel. So, however you employ these, they need to be either numerous and completely inaccurate, or few in number and still inaccurate. So these are more, as I really like to say, cannon fodder more than militia. You can think of militia as a step up from these guys. In our current game, we haven't really included armed citizenry. I think in the future we would like to, but if you do include them, I would say their movement could probably be the same as militia, but their firing capabilities, I would say, hit or miss depending on the umpire. Once again, these are not professional troops. They won't be able to stand up in a prolonged firefight or in a melee. So just keep those in mind when trying to employ this armed mob, these peasants, sort of say.
I know you and I have talked. Is maybe just they have to roll sixes only to hit and get a
Yes.
volley off or something like that. And there's plenty of examples. Is one of our favorite YouTubers, Fat Electrician. He does a video over a guy who literally grabbed a rifle right before the Battle of Concord and just went out like an old man on his front yard and shot a round at the British, if I'm not mistaken. So you have the armed citizenry. Let's say they received a little bit of training. They become militia, the backbone for at least the American Revolutionary War, the backbone of our army. How does militia play into Rev War, 7 Years' War, Napoleonic's era, which I'm not too familiar with, but I know you are?
Yeah, I think militia is a very interesting thing. As you mentioned, to step up from the armed citizenry. These militia are troops that are semi-trained. They get together maybe, once a month or just a few times a year to go over basic drill, with the intent being that the regular professional army doesn't have to show up for every single issue. This is really big in the 13 colonies, which is why there's already a huge militia establishment in the colonies whenever the revolution breaks out, because the colonies are already used to defending themselves from French incursions, but Britain doesn't have the time to send all of her professional forces across the ocean every single time there's an issue with France. So each colony begins to keep standing militia detachments for each colony that can be raised at a moment's notice. We talk about the citizen soldier today with the National Guard. This is that same mindset. Um, the militia train every once in a while, but day to day, there might be a cobbler, there might be a farmer, um, maybe a lower end politician. So these are far from your most professional troops, but they are most certainly more trained. And in some cases, some militia units have more experience than British regulars. These militia are constantly being called in to fight off native incursions in the Appalachians. But on the continent of Europe, when we're talking about militia, you're not seeing many armies being purely made up of militia, kind of like the American army was, especially in the beginning portions of the war. You don't really see that um, really in Europe. In the age of Napoleon, near his downfall, you don't really start to see militia. You see more like conscripts. Now, the French in the beginning of the Napoleonic Wars did have a national guard, and they kept that, if I'm not mistaken, through most part of the war. But that didn't really make up a large majority of the French army, whereas the militia did make up a large majority of the American army during the Revolution. So I really say it depends on what era you're kind of thinking. Militia should be, I would say, roughly based around regular infantry numbers whenever you're putting them on a base for simplicity purposes. Militia should be able to engage in hand to hand combat and ranged combat much better than armed citizenry, but they must also be less than your more professional line infantry troops. So I would say keep those in mind whenever you're looking to make a militia force. And militia can be very numerous, very, very numerous, depending on the place and the era.
So if I got Colonel Benjamin Martin from the Patriot as my commander, I get a +1 in melee, correct?
I would honestly say plus 20 on a d20.
I like it. It is all right. So you mentioned conscripts. We've gone from townsfolk to some organized townfolk to some conscripts going into just normal line infantry, which I would assume that's what made up the conscripts in the French army. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, but these conscripts, although they're not really militia, they are less performing line infantry. You can kind of think of these as conscripts, like they received their basic combat training like en route to the front, so they got more training than militia, sure, but it was much more hurried. Like we're legit straight out basic training. You're going right to the front. Like there is no time to get settled into the unit, time to take months to learn this drill. It's you've learned the fundamentals, and now we're sending you out. So these conscripts, during Napoleon's downfall, the 1813, 1814 campaign in France, the conscripts perform very valiantly, right? But the issue is they're just not trained as well as they could be. So that's why even conscripts, I kind of semi lump with militia in stats,
Okay.
but differentiate them in, I guess you could say, in function and form.
Okay. Then just going on to normal line infantry. The reason the sky's blue is because of them. So how do they function and what is their place historically other than to close in and destroy the enemy?
So your line infantry, this is going to be the backbone of any standing army of any repute, right? The British regulars, when we say regulars, that pretty much translates to your standard line infantry. These are, I'm not going to say the cream of the crop, but these are, whenever you have a fire, you send them to put it out instantly. Every army in the age of the musket and black powder would have had line infantry of some sort, even some backwards armies such as the Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth. Rest in peace. Like they still had um, several units of line infantry. But yeah, I would say like these are, I would say these are more like your
Okay.
baseline units. So your elite infantry will be better than this, but your militia and conscripts will be worse than it, if anything.
And again, you're just reading my mind. Let's go into some elite infantry units, but let's talk about how does I've started a campaign, okay? Like we do. I've started the campaign. I've got a line unit. I'm just going to make one up, the 23rd New York, right? And they've just been fighting, 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 going through it. When does a line unit become elite? Or do they have to have a certain regimental name like a foot guard, a grenadier company? Where's that transition there?
Yeah, very good question. I would say it depends on how you're playing it. If you are doing just a campaign or a short campaign or a regular battle, I would say that your campaign or battle would start off with units that were already considered elite. Such as whenever the American Revolution broke out, you had the 33rd Regiment of Foot. They were called the pattern for a reason. The rest of the army wanted to model off of this regiment. So you can consider that regiment elite, and you could start the game off with them as elite, or you could start all your line units off as just your standard Joes. And should they, let's say, win 5 battles, really up to the players in the umpire, but let's say they win a certain amount of victories or have a certain amount of criteria met, then they can earn that, what I like to call veteran status, which makes them elite. But there are some units that are just inherently going to be elite, such as grenadiers. Grenadiers were normally either the tallest or the strongest or most professional soldiers from the regiment, and they would lump them together and just into a single company. So by default, if you have a grenadier company on the battlefield, that should be considered elite, or at least better than your standard line infantry. You mentioned guards a second ago. I can't envision any world I'm playing Napoleonic campaign or war game and I have the old guard and they're not considered elite.
Right.
Um, so I would say just keep that in mind. Elite can be something that you start off with, and if you're using a unit that was historically elite, such as the old guard, then they'll start the campaign off with that elite infantry status. But some units can earn that status through several battles over the course of a campaign.
Is I like it, and just shifting gears to the other side of infantry is what you and I were considered. Well, you are considered, and what I was considered when we were in light infantry. So, what makes light infantry different from line infantry?
Right. So your light infantry, first of all, hit the ratio. You're going to have a single company of light infantry to 10 companies of regular line infantry, at least with the British Army. So you'd have 9 infantry, or you'd have 10 infantry companies. One of those would be the light infantry company. These were generally the quickest, most nimble, and best shots from the regiment, kind of the counter to the grenadiers, who are the biggest, the strongest. Now you have the lightest, the fastest. And that's really the difference between light infantry and line. This light infantry is not, it's changing the name. It's no longer in line. It's really fighting in what we like to call loose order. So they're not standing shoulder to shoulder and firing at the enemy. These guys are spread out, taking cover behind trees. They are not too much worried about precision and shoulder of arms. Everyone present their weapon at the same time. Everyone get done loading at the exact same time. Light infantry is not their function. Their function is more to harass the enemy and to screen, basically protecting the rest of the regiment using themselves, keeping the enemy far away if they can.
So, kind of already answered it, but that's how I would use it if we're playing a campaign or a battle. Have them help create more distance for the main army, essentially, especially if I got to do an orderly retreat or just an all-out retreat. It sounds like.
Yeah, and they can also be used really good as scouts as well. I know on campaign, these guys are more masters of, I want to say the wilderness, but these guys are more masters of trying to stay concealed, or they know how to use concealment a little bit better than regular forces. So these guys definitely have more of an advantage when it comes to reconnaissance, perhaps trying to locate the enemy army without being seen themselves. And I would say whenever you're playing light infantry, how you should play them is this: light infantry should have a longer range than line infantry. Um, but most of the time, these guys don't have bayonets, most of the time. So I would say if light infantry gets in contact, they should perform worse than line infantry. In our current game, uh, light infantry has the same melee stats as militia, but they have the same ranged stats, so shooting their weapons, as elite line infantry. So these guys can put down a good amount of lead and hit on target. But if you close with them, whether it be infantry or cavalry, they're not going to hold up too well.
I've seen them hold their own. So let's go to the elite light infantry, which is going to be some rifled, some marksmen. I think is how they would have been called in Rev War era. Is explain them the difference between them and normal light infantry.
So when we were divvying these up, elite light infantry performs the exact same way that regular light infantry does. Whereas elite line infantry with the grenadiers, these are more like your shock. You send those in whenever the attack is faltering. The elite line infantry doesn't have too much of a different function than it can just shoot further more accurately. So, as you mentioned, the elite line infantry, this will include your riflemen, which the rifleman ratio to light infantry, you should have far fewer rifles than you do regular muskets, far fewer, because it was just so much more expensive to get rifled muskets at the time. But I think right now our regular light infantry range is 8 inches. Elite light infantry range with their rifles is 10 inches. Now, we have also increased the elite light infantry's melee to match line infantry because when we're talking about these elites in the light infantry world, it's not just a random farmer with a rifle that can hunt deer very well. We're also including elite line infantry from other eras, such as the Napoleonic era. We have the voltigeurs, which were the French light infantry at the time of the old guard. So you have guys talking about moving from the regular line grenadiers, and they decide that they want to move into a more light portion here. So every regiment's going to need this form of light infantry to screen them. And for the old guard, they need it too. So even your elite units need screeners. So then you get elite light infantry. So although they don't have all the rifling, they definitely have the experience, whether that be in hand-to-hand combat or just regularly firing their muskets. So that's the several factors that we've included when making elite light infantry.
Alrighty, is let's talk about the last infantry type there is for at least our rule set and how we do campaigns. Let's talk about the Marines, which I have seen literally turn the tide of two different battles and campaigns. The British Marines, that is, as I've seen them turn tides. What makes them different than line infantry or light infantry?
Yeah, I would say we briefly covered Marines in our previous naval video. And I know hopefully in a future video, we'll talk about more specialized units during this era. But what makes them different is quite simply the water. These guys are more experts when it comes to sea type operations. And these are really just infantry at sea. And so currently in our game, how the Marines work is they have the same shooting stats as line infantry, the same melee, so hand to hand combat stats as line infantry, the same morale as line infantry, and the same amount of men per base as line infantry. The only difference they get is that when rowing ashore, they move at double the speed. When trying to cross a ford of a river, they get advantage. On the campaign map, they get advantage when trying to locate water crossings and what is suitable for that. Marines can also be used on ships if you're playing some kind of naval combat and you get boarded. Now your melee defense is higher because now you have these Marines that specialize in hand to hand combat on ships. So I think if you have enough ships out at sea, you can land an entire Marine regiment ashore, which in other ways just translates to line infantry. But like I said, whenever Marines are involved, On land, you will want to involve them when it has something to do with a water operation. Other than that, they are just standard line infantry. They just like to get a little wet.
No, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think it's going to be our episode 2 for our Middle Colonies campaign. The British player landed a whole bunch of regiment of Marines actually, and had it not
Yep.
been foggy, would have been a bad day for that militia. But we got really lucky and were able to bloody their nose a bit, just with militia. So I think that covers every type of infantry unit that we use. Am I missing any?
I will say that this video is more European, Western European, like centric when we're talking about the line infantry, light infantry. We're not really including other infantry types, namely native infantry types, and we plan to do that in a later video. But this is kind of should be a good guideline whenever you're making your armies. You really just need to know that line infantry is going to make the bulk of professional troops. You can have a junk ton of militia, but you must make sure that their stats are garbage. Same thing with the armed citizenry. Your elite line infantry, light infantry, and elite light infantry, those should be more rare units. These are units that maybe you can combine from several regiments to make a really good breakthrough strike force. But your backbone is the line infantry. Take care of them and use militia and armed citizenry as cannon fire. We've seen the Americans do that plenty of times. They don't care how many get blown to bits,
They're
and so
ardent
long as
patriots. Let's keep it at that. They're ardent patriots. They're willing to die for the cause. No, as Caleb, as you mentioned, we're going to be doing a video on specialized units. We're going to throw the natives in there, so we feel that kind of fits them a little better. We're going to be doing one on cav and one on artillery. Those videos are soon to come out. Again, we try to release every Friday. But other than that, thanks for stopping by.
That's it for today's episode. For battles, brushes, and everything in between, make sure you subscribe and join the community. Until next time, Generals, see you on the tabletop.